When I was quietly left out of my father's will, I thought it was a mistake until I uncovered the decades of lies, betrayal, and manipulation that had been hiding in plain sight, and finally fought back to reclaim what was rightfully mine. My name's Jake Carter, I'm 42, and for most of my life I thought I was the steady one in the family, not flashy, not the favorite, just the dependable middle child who kept things together when mom got sick and dad started disappearing emotionally. My older brother Keith is 45, loud, charming, always knew how to work a room, and my younger sister Emily, she's 35 now, was always the soft one, the artistic soul who everyone said needed protecting. I never really resented any of it, not until last year, the day of Dad's funeral, when we were sitting in that cold conference room at the lawyer's office, me thinking about how I'd barely processed the loss and already we were diving into legal documents. The lawyer cleared his throat and said, as per the will of Henry Carter, and I swear my stomach dropped, because the way Keith was already smirking and Emily wouldn't meet my eye, I knew something was off. When he got to the part about the estate, the house, the land, Dad's investments, everything was being split between Keith and Emily, and my name, it didn't even come up, not once, not even a mention of why, no letter, no explanation, like I'd never been part of this family. I sat there in stunned silence while Keith patted my back like I'd just lost a card game. Emily muttered some excuse about not knowing and needing to talk later, and all I could do was nod and walk out of there, trying not to break down in front of a bunch of strangers, but something inside me cracked that day, not just because of the money, though yeah, it stung, but because it made me question everything I thought I knew about my place in the family, about who I really was to them. I spent the next week in a haze, going over every memory I could dig up, wondering if there had been signs, if Dad had said something I missed, if I'd done something unforgivable without realizing it, and then I found something, a small cardboard box tucked into the back of Mom's old closet. While I was helping Emily clean out her things, she'd told me not to worry about that closet, said it was mostly junk, but something told me to look anyway. Inside was a stack of letters, some written by Mom, some addressed to Dad, but the most shocking were the ones with my name on them, unopened, most dated around the time I'd moved out at 19 after a huge fight with Dad, a fight I'd always believed was the final straw that made him push me away. But these letters, they were apologies, love letters in their own way, desperate attempts to reconnect, and they had never been sent, never even mentioned, just locked away like I was some secret mistake he tried to erase from his life. And that was the moment I knew, this wasn't a simple oversight or a legal formality, this was intentional. Someone made sure I'd be forgotten, and I was done being quiet about it. I didn't sleep that night, just kept going over those letters, reading them again and again, Mom's shaky handwriting saying things like, Jake deserves to know we love him and please send this one, he needs to hear from you, and Dad's responses scribbled in the margins, cold things like he chose to leave or this won't help anything. It made my chest tighten, but what really twisted the knife was the letter from Keith, buried underneath the rest. He'd written it to Dad the week after I left home, telling him not to worry about me, that I was always too sensitive, too much trouble, and that keeping me away was probably for the best. He even said I'd probably screw things up if I got involved with the family business, and that maybe it was smarter to invest in Emily instead. And the worst part, Dad agreed. He wrote right back in pencil, "You're right, Keith, Jake's not built for this, I'll do what needs to be done." Like I was some broken tool they decided to leave in the shed. I was shaking when I read that, not even angry yet, just hollow, like someone had scooped my insides out and left me sitting there trying to feel something. I didn't tell Emily right away, didn't even know if I should, but I started digging, calling the lawyer, asking if there had been any changes to the will before Dad died, and at first he stonewalled me, said everything was in order, but after a few days of pressure and a reminder that I had a legal right to request a copy of the original will if I had reason to believe something changed unfairly, he finally called me back, voice nervous, and said there had been a change 6 months before Dad passed, that Dad came in with Keith to rewrite everything, remove me completely, and reassign my share to Keith in trust for Emily's benefit. I asked if Dad seemed coherent when he signed it. The lawyer hesitated, then said, "Between you and me, no, not fully." Said Dad was frail, confused, kept asking about dates that didn't make sense, but Keith insisted it was fine and rushed him through the process, and my stomach sank because now I wasn't just cut out emotionally, I was cut out legally too, and it stank of manipulation. I finally confronted Emily after that, asked her if she knew, and her face went white. She broke down crying and swore she didn't, that Keith told her I wanted out, that I refused my inheritance, said I wanted to be done with the family, that I hated Dad, and that's why he handled everything without me. and I just stood there in her kitchen, holding those damn letters, watching her cry like a kid who just realized the monster under the bed was real. And I told her everything about the will, about the lawyer, about Keith's letter, and her expression changed, like something had snapped inside her too. She told me she'd felt weird about the whole thing for months, but Keith kept reassuring her it was fine, that I was off living my life and didn't want anything to do with them anymore. And suddenly we were both realizing just how deep this betrayal went, how long it had been quietly growing like mold under the floorboards, and for the first time in years, Emily and I were on the same side. And we knew what we had to do next. We didn't rush it. We knew if we were gonna go after Keith, we had to be smart. He was slick, always had a way of twisting things to make himself look like the victim, and we couldn't afford to walk into this with just emotions. Emily started by pulling up her financial records, and what she found made her sick. Dad had supposedly set up a trust fund for her, something to support her art and pay off her debts, but it had been bled dry within months of Dad's death, all under Keith's management. She never even saw most of it, just tiny allowances Keith said were being carefully controlled for her benefit, and meanwhile, he'd bought himself a new truck, expanded his business, even took a month-long trip to Hawaii with his girlfriend, and when she called him out on it, he brushed her off, said trusts are complicated and she didn't understand how investments worked. But now he had a paper trail, and with the lawyer's reluctant help and a copy of the original will he finally admitted still existed in his files. We started putting together a case. I reached out to a probate attorney, explained everything, showed him the letters, the revised will, the financial documents, and his face went from curious to stone-cold serious in about 5 minutes. He said we had a shot, a real one, that if we could prove Dad wasn't of sound mind when the changes were made, and that Keith used undue influence, we could have the will thrown out and the estate re-evaluated, but the process would be brutal, messy, public, and it'd mean turning this into a full-on legal battle against our own brother. I asked Emily if she was sure about doing this, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "He stole from you, he stole from me, and he twisted Dad into something he wasn't." "Yeah, I'm sure." So we filed the petition and the storm began. Keith found out within a week and went ballistic. Started calling both of us non-stop, leaving these unhinged voicemails accusing us of destroying the family, of being greedy, of disrespecting Dad's legacy. And when that didn't work, he showed up at my house, unannounced, tried to act cool at first, said we were blowing things out of proportion, tried to hug me like nothing was wrong, and when I wouldn't play along, he got mean, fast, said I was always jealous, always the outsider, and that Dad wanted me gone, that I couldn't handle the truth, and I just stood there, letting him spit all that venom, because I realized something right then. He was scared, not smug, not confident like he always was, but rattled, cornered, because for the first time in his life, I wasn't staying quiet, I wasn't letting it slide. I told him straight to his face that the truth was coming out, that the lies were done, and he looked at me with this flash of panic, like he finally saw the one thing he couldn't control, and then he stormed off, muttering threats under his breath. And I watched him go, heart pounding, knowing this was far from over, but also knowing that for the first time in decades, I wasn't the one walking away. The court date was set for mid-April, and those weeks leading up to it felt like walking through fog made of glass. Every step forward cut a little deeper, but we kept moving anyway. Emily and I were closer than we'd ever been, meeting late at night to sort through documents, piecing together Dad's mental decline, his hospital visits, his memory lapses, even testimony from a nurse who remembered Keith coming in and arguing with staff about getting Dad discharged early, saying things like he's fine, he just forgets stuff sometimes. And I couldn't stop thinking about how many of those forgetful days were the ones Keith used to slide things under the rug. The day we finally walked into that courtroom, I was shaking, not from fear but from pressure, from years of silence boiling over into something loud and raw. Keith showed up in a tailored suit like he was going to a damn business lunch, smug as ever, his lawyer trying to keep things cordial, but once the questioning began, it started to crumble. First the financials, Emily's missing funds, the unapproved withdrawals, the timing of the truck and the trip, then came the medical records, Dad's neurological evaluations that clearly stated increased cognitive impairment, and then the letters. Those letters tore through the room like a knife, especially the one from Mom begging Dad to reconnect with me, and the one from Keith telling Dad to keep me out. Keith tried to claim they were old, irrelevant, said Dad changed his mind later, but the judge wasn't buying it. Then came our lawyer's final blow. He brought up the original will, the one that split everything evenly, signed just 2 years before Dad's diagnosis, and asked the obvious question: why would a dying man, with a history of memory loss, completely cut out his son without explanation, after years of trying to reconnect, and Keith had no answer, just sat there sweating in his overpriced suit. I didn't say much that day, just answered questions. Told the truth, let the documents and the silence speak louder than I ever could, and when the hearing ended, the judge said she needed time to review, but the look on her face already told me which way the wind was blowing. It was over, not officially yet, but we knew. Keith knew too. He wouldn't even look at me as he left the courtroom, and I don't know if that was guilt or just defeat, but I didn't care anymore, because for the first time in years, the scales were tipping back, and I could finally breathe without feeling like I was choking on someone else's lies. The judge ruled in our favor 2 weeks later, said there was enough evidence of undue influence and lack of mental capacity to invalidate the revised will, and just like that, the estate reverted to the original split, 1/3 each, equal, fair, and honest, and you'd think I would have felt triumphant, but what I felt was something else entirely, something heavier and sweeter, like peace mixed with grief, like winning a war that never should have been fought in the first place. Keith didn't show up to the final hearing. His lawyer just sent a statement saying he wouldn't contest the ruling. He was done. I heard through an old family friend that he moved out of state a month later, sold off his business, left town quietly like a man trying to outrun his own reflection. Emily and I stood outside the courthouse that day, just us two, sun on our faces, this weird quiet between us, not awkward, just full, like we both understood what it had cost to get here. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions," and I said, "I'm sorry I didn't fight sooner," and we hugged, not out of obligation or habit, but because we finally meant it. We stayed close after that, closer than we'd ever been. I helped her start a small art studio with her rightful share, and she helped me build something too, not just a better house or retirement fund or whatever, but a sense of self again, a reminder that I wasn't invisible, that I never had been. I still think about Dad sometimes. Not with bitterness, but with sadness, wondering what he might have said if he'd had one more clear day, wondering if he'd been sorry, if he'd been proud of how I turned out. I'll never know, but what I do know is this: I'm not the quiet one anymore, not the forgotten one, not the middle child lost in someone else's story. I stood up, I found my voice, and I made sure it was heard, and maybe that's the inheritance that matters most. Not the money, not the land, but the truth, the voice, the spine it takes to stand your ground when everyone else wants you to disappear. And now when I look in the mirror, I don't see the guy who got left out, I see the guy who came back and took his place at the table, and I'll never let anyone take that from me again. I gave everything to please a mother who never gave love back, not knowing the painful secret she was hiding. This story unravels decades of people-pleasing, heartbreak, and identity loss until one moment changed everything. Now I'm telling it all, for me and for my daughter. My name's Claire, I'm 38, I live in Oregon now, but I grew up in Kansas, and if there's one thing I've learned lately, it's that love shouldn't feel like a reward you have to beg for. It took me most of my life to figure that out, and I'm still untangling all the parts of me that got warped trying to be good enough for someone who just couldn't give me what I needed. My mom, Jean, was always cold. I mean, she wasn't cruel exactly. She wasn't the type to scream or throw things or call you names. She was worse than that. She was distant, uninterested, like she was waiting for someone more interesting to enter the room, and growing up in that kind of quiet rejection is like trying to grow flowers in dry concrete. Nothing sticks, everything cracks. I remember being 6 and bringing her drawings from school. She'd look at them like they were tax forms, say something like, that's nice, and then go back to whatever she was doing. I don't think she even looked at the paper half the time. And it didn't matter what I did, straight A's, cheer captain, piano recitals. I once won a county art contest and she didn't even show up, said she had a migraine and couldn't handle the noise. I spent so much time thinking if I just did the next right thing she'd finally light up, finally look at me the way the other moms did their kids, but she never did. She never hugged me unless it was a birthday photo op, never told me she was proud, and the worst part is, I didn't even realize how messed up that was until way later. It just felt normal to me. Like some kids got warm mothers and some got the cold ones, that's just how it is. And my dad, well, he was there but never in it. You know, like background furniture. He worked, he ate, he read the paper, but he never stepped in, and that silence from both of them taught me to perform instead of feel, taught me to chase people instead of trust them. Fast forward to my 20s and I was the ultimate people pleaser, the kind who says yes before even hearing the question, the kind who apologizes when someone else bumps into her. It took me into toxic friendships, manipulative relationships, even a marriage that felt more like a performance than a partnership. I married a guy named Doug when I was 27, mostly because he seemed impressed by me, and that felt like love at the time. he liked my ambition, my get things done energy, but he never actually saw me, not really. We divorced 5 years later, no kids, just 5 years of trying to fix something I didn't even want, and that's around the time I started therapy. And wow, I wish I'd gone sooner, because the first time my therapist asked, "When did you learn you had to earn love?" I just stared at her like she'd dropped a brick on the floor. I had no answer, because I'd never questioned it. I always thought it was on me to be lovable enough, worthy enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, and if someone didn't love me, it meant I failed. I had no idea how much of that traced back to my mom. I mean, you think you're over childhood stuff until you realize your whole personality is a reaction to it. It's wild. And then, the moment everything started to unravel came not from therapy, not from reflection, but from something completely unexpected. A letter, a stupid old letter I found in her house after she got sick, and that letter turned my whole life sideways. It was March when I got the call. Mom had collapsed at home and was being taken to the hospital, and even though we weren't close, not really, I got on a plane the next morning. Something in me still jumped when she needed something, like some old reflex I couldn't shake. When I got there, she was conscious but weak, some kind of cardiac episode, and the doctors wanted her to stay with someone for a few weeks after release. My older brother Mark lives in Chicago and didn't even offer, shocker. So it was me. I moved her into my place temporarily, turned the guest room into her little den, stocked up on her weird teas and brand cereal. And you know what? I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be our moment, like maybe facing her own mortality would open her up a little, soften her edges, let her say something real. But nope, even at her weakest, she stayed in her fortress. She'd say thank you in that flat voice, make comments about how I hadn't redecorated since college, and don't I ever cook real food, like she couldn't help herself, like letting me feel good for 1 second might crack something open in her. I kept waiting for the moment, that movie moment where the mother finally breaks down and tells you why she was so cold, that she's sorry, that she loves you but didn't know how to show it. But it never came. Instead she just sat there criticizing, retreating, and I started realizing how much of my energy was still wrapped around trying to get this woman to say one warm thing. It was exhausting. And then one afternoon she asked me to go pick up some old photo albums from her house, said they were in a cedar chest in her closet and she wanted to look through them again. So I went, and while I was rummaging through the chest, I found this faded manila envelope wedged in between old yearbooks. It had my name on it, in her handwriting, just Claire. And I swear my heart started pounding like I was opening a time capsule from a different version of her. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it, expecting maybe old report cards or some baby photo, but inside was a single letter, handwritten, no date, just several pages in her tight, slanted script, and it started with the words "I never wanted a daughter," and I couldn't breathe. It hit me like a fist. I read the whole thing in one sitting, and it was God. It was brutal, honest, raw, but cruel in its own way. She talked about how she felt trapped when she had me, how she'd wanted to leave my dad but found out she was pregnant and did the right thing, how she resented the way her life turned into diapers and PTA meetings and how she never felt cut out for motherhood. And then she wrote something that made my stomach twist. I tried, but I never connected with Claire, not the way I did with Mark, and I always felt guilty for that. But the truth is, she reminds me too much of myself. I sat there in that dusty bedroom, holding this letter like it was radioactive, and all I could think was, it wasn't me. I wasn't unlovable. I was just born to someone who couldn't love me the way I needed, and I'd spent my whole damn life thinking I was broken when really, I'd just been trying to bloom in a place where nothing grew. I cried, not the cute kind either. I mean that full body shaking kind of cry where all the years come pouring out. And then I went home and didn't say a word to her about the letter, not yet. I needed to think, to figure out what it meant now that the illusion was shattered, because it did change something in me, something big. The weirdest part after reading that letter wasn't even the pain, it was the clarity, like suddenly my whole life had a translator. All the cold shoulders, the offhand insults, the lack of warmth, they weren't reflections of me, they were projections of her, her own grief, her own disappointment, her own regret, and that realization didn't make it easier exactly, but it did make it make sense, and something shifted after that. I stopped trying to impress her, I stopped bending myself into shapes just to avoid her sharpness, and I swear it was like she could sense the shift, because she started acting more agitated, snapping more, like my withdrawal triggered something in her, like she needed me to need her to feel in control, and the more I pulled back, the more she scratched at me with these little jabs. You've put on weight since I last saw you, your hair used to be prettier when you were younger, funny you never had children, maybe that's for the best. And that last one hit harder than the rest, because I had a daughter now. She wasn't biologically mine, but she was mine all the same. Her name's Emma, she's 12, and she's my whole damn heart. She came into my life 4 years ago when I met her dad, James, my partner now. He'd been raising her alone since his wife died when Emma was 7, and when we met, I wasn't even looking for a relationship, much less a family. But the connection was instant, with both of them, and Emma, she needed me, but not in the way I was used to. She didn't want a performance, she wanted presence, and over time I became that for her. I became hers, and when James and I moved in together, she started calling me mom on her own, no pressure. Just one day she said it and I cried in the laundry room for 15 minutes straight, and being a mother to her healed things in me I didn't know were bleeding, because every time I looked at her, I promised myself I'd never make her feel how I felt growing up. I told her I loved her every day, even when she rolled her eyes. I showed up to every dance recital, every science fair. I let her mess up, I let her be real, and I made space for her feelings even when I didn't understand them. And that's when I started to realize something huge. I had broken the cycle without even knowing it. By being who I needed when I was little, I was changing the script, and that's what gave me the strength to finally confront my mom. Not to get some perfect apology, not to fix anything, but to close the door I'd been holding open my whole damn life. So one night, after Emma had gone to bed and James was working late, I made her tea and sat across from her and told her I'd found the letter. I watched her face stiffen, not with shame, but with that same icy detachment she always wore like armor. She didn't apologize, she didn't even look surprised, she just said, "Well, you weren't supposed to find it." And I told her, "I know," and then I said something I didn't know I needed to say until the words left my mouth. "You don't have to love me, but I'm done chasing it." And it was like some invisible chain snapped off my chest, like I could finally breathe in a way I hadn't since childhood. She looked at me for a long time, her face hard to read, and then she said, "You always were too sensitive." And I laughed. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly her, even in that moment, and I stood up, kissed her on the forehead, like she was a stranger I was saying goodbye to, and I went to bed feeling more free than I'd ever felt before. The next morning she was gone, not dead, just gone. She packed her bag and called Mark to come get her without saying a word to me. No thank you, no goodbye, just vanished from my house like a ghost, and I'd be lying if I said that didn't sting. There was still a small part of me, some half-grown child inside, hoping that confrontation might finally shake something loose in her, but it didn't, and weirdly, that was its own kind of closure, because I didn't feel rage, I didn't feel heartbreak, I felt release, like I'd spent my whole life trying to climb a wall that was never coming down, and now I was finally walking away from it. I started focusing even harder on Emma after that, on making sure she never had to question her worth, and it wasn't just about big gestures, it was the little things, taking interest in her silly stories, remembering what she liked on her toast, asking about her day and actually listening. And one afternoon, maybe 2 months later, we were driving home from her friend's birthday party, and out of nowhere, she said, "I'm really glad you're my mom," and it hit me so hard I almost missed the turn. I just reached across the console and squeezed her hand and said, "I'm really glad too," and it was like everything inside me that had been fractured finally lined up again, like I didn't need anything from my past to feel whole anymore, because I was living proof that you don't have to become what you came from, you can build new roots. And one night, James and I were out on the back deck after Emma went to bed, just sitting with wine and soft music, and I told him everything, the letter, the confrontation, all of it, and he listened the way he always does, with his whole body, like the way you look at a storm rolling in. And when I finished, he said, "You're the strongest person I know, Claire," and I felt it in my bones, not just as a compliment, but as a truth I'd earned, because strength isn't about surviving pain, it's about facing it head on, saying, "I see what you did to me and I'm choosing differently," and I realized I'd been doing that all along. Every time I showed Emma love without condition, every time I held my ground instead of chasing approval, every time I said no without guilt, I was rewriting the legacy my mother tried to hand me, and it didn't matter anymore if she ever came around, because I had built something real without her. And maybe the twist in my story isn't that she changed, but that I did, that I stopped letting her absence define my presence, that I became the kind of mother mine couldn't be, and that was more powerful than any apology she never gave. A year later, almost to the day, I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just my name in that same familiar slanted handwriting, and when I opened it, it was only a single page, short, no grand confessions, no tears in the ink, just my mom's words, "I saw how Emma looked at you, and I hope one day you'll forgive me for not knowing how to do that." And for the first time in my life, I didn't cry over her, I didn't ache. I just nodded, like yeah, that's about as close to an apology as she'll ever get, and I didn't need more, because the real healing didn't come from her, it came from me, from doing the work, from choosing softness where I'd been hardened, from loving Emma out loud, every day, even when it was messy, especially when it was messy, and now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a girl desperate to be enough, I see a woman who is, who shows up, who breaks cycles, who rewrites stories, and if you'd told me 5 years ago that this would be the ending, not some big reunion with my mom, not some dramatic forgiveness scene, but a quiet life filled with real love and small victories and hand-drawn birthday cards from a girl who calls me mom, I wouldn't have believed it. But that's the thing about healing, it doesn't always look like fireworks, sometimes it looks like pancakes on a Sunday morning, or dance parties in the kitchen, or the way your kid hugs you just a little longer than they need to, and I'll take that ending over anything else, any day. Because I finally learned that the love I was chasing was never hers to give, it was mine to grow, and now that I have, I'm never. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crazy twists. See you in the next one.